Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets. It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. We're going to take them apart.
New video shows the arrest of a journalist covering the protest outside of an ICE facility there.
And they continue to push me, and then eventually one of them throws a punch. And then 20 seconds later, I end up in a home. And a sergeant walks up and points to me and says to the officers, "Cuff him." No reason given. The officers didn't know what they were doing. Somebody made the call to have me arrested. We just don't know who yet, and I think we're going to find out. So now we're going to get assaulted. You're going to be pushed. You're going to be. Don't do that. Where'd it go?
Specifically naming some major funding sources like George Soros's Open Society Foundation,
the Arabella Funding Network, the Tides Funding Network, Neville Roy Singham and his network, Foreign Cash.
In a shocking revelation, DHS uncovers a sinister alliance between corrupt Portland police and Antifa.
Imagine a city where the very officers sworn to protect you are secretly working with the mob they're supposed to stop. Picture a journalist, camera in hand, documenting chaos in the streets, only to be tackled, handcuffed, and silenced. Not by rioters, but by the police. This isn't a dystopian novel. It's the chilling reality uncovered by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in Portland, Oregon, where a sinister alliance between corrupt cops and Antifa has been exposed. What began as a single arrest has unraveled into a federal corruption probe, revealing a deadly motive behind the riots that shook America. Buckle up as we dive into a story of betrayal, money, and power that will leave you questioning who really holds the badge in our cities. The spark, a journalist's arrest, ignites a firestorm in the heart of Portland on September 30th, 2025. Independent journalist Nick Sorda set out to document an Antifa-led riot outside an Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE facility. His mission was simple: capture the truth about the violence gripping the city. But what happened next was anything but routine. As Sorda filmed the chaos, masked militants hurling fireworks and bottles at federal agents, he found himself surrounded. Antifa members didn't just block his path, they attacked him, throwing punches and tackling him to the ground. Bruised and battered, with his equipment smashed, Sorda sought safety near Portland police officers, assuming their presence would offer protection. Instead, he was met with a shocking betrayal. "They threw several punches my way and tackled me to the ground," Sorda recounted in a shaken voice. "I walked over to the police, not to ask for help, just because I thought it would be safer to be around cops. But then a sergeant pointed at me and said, 'Cuff him.' No reason given. The officers didn't even know why they were arresting me." Sorda's crime. Documenting Antifa's violence in a city that, according to DHS reports, had seemingly turned a blind eye to it. His arrest wasn't an isolated incident. It was the spark that ignited a federal investigation into a web of corruption that reached far beyond Portland streets. The question lingered. Why would police target a journalist while letting rioters walk free? From one arrest to a pattern of injustice. Sorda's story wasn't unique. As we peel back the layers, a disturbing pattern emerges. One where journalists and bystanders are punished, while Antifa operatives face no consequences. What was happening in Portland, and who was pulling the strings? A city under siege, Antifa's unchecked violence. Portland, long known as a hotbed of progressive activism, had become a battleground by 2025. The IC facility, a frequent target of Antifa protests, had endured over 100 documented attacks, according to DHS briefings. Fireworks, Molotov cocktails, and bottles rained down on federal agents, yet Portland police consistently failed to intervene. No arrests were made among Antifa members, even as the violence escalated. Meanwhile, those who dared to document the chaos, journalists like Sorder and Katie Davis Court, faced brutal consequences. Court, another reporter covering the same protests, was struck in the face with a flagpole by an Antifa militant. "I immediately ran to a Portland police officer," she said, desperation evident in her voice. "I asked, 'Can you guys finally do something?' But they refused to come in and make an arrest." The suspect walked free while 3 officers stood by, watching her struggle to identify her attacker. In the same week, 3 journalists were attacked, 2 injured, and 1, Sorder, jailed. Yet Antifa faced 0 arrests. This wasn't just negligence, it was selective enforcement. DHS had logged over 20 instances where Portland police failed to enforce basic riot laws during attacks on the ICE facility. The numbers painted a grim picture: 100 attacks, no charges against Antifa, and a growing sense that the city's law enforcement was protecting the wrong side. A deeper conspiracy. Unraveled. As DHS dug deeper, the evidence pointed to something far more sinister than inaction. What they uncovered wasn't just a failure to act. It was a deliberate effort to shield Antifa, funded by a shadowy network that blurred the line between activism and organized crime. Following the money, a pipeline of corruption. The breakthrough came when federal investigators turned their attention to Portland's finances. In 2024, Mayor Ted Wheeler's administration redirected $15 million from the police budget to so-called community safety grants. On the surface, these grants were meant to fund local outreach programs. But DHS audits revealed a darker truth. The money was flowing into the hands of activist groups linked to Antifa. It didn't look like ordinary budgeting errors. A DHS source noted it looked like a pipeline. The funds, funneled through a web of non-profit intermediaries, ended up in the accounts of collectives organizing nightly riots. Some of these groups had direct ties to ex-officers who retained access to police resources, raising alarms about insider collusion. By August 2025, hundreds of thousands of dollars had moved through a single non-profit, with evidence of coordination between these groups and friendly officers who turned a blind eye to the violence. This wasn't just a local scandal. DHS uncovered patterns of coordination across cities like Portland, Seattle, and Chicago. Money labeled for community safety was being used to pay and transport activists to participate in unrest. The same non-profits appeared in multiple federal briefings, linked by identical wire transfers and event permits. Researcher Seamus Bruner, working with the Government Accountability Institute, dubbed this network Riot Inc., a shadow system of donors, legal teams, and logistics that transformed local protests into nationwide operations. From local scandal to national crisis. What started as one journalist's arrest had ballooned into a federal corruption probe. But the question remained, who was funding this network and how deep did the corruption go? The answers would shake the nation. The protest industrial complex, unmasking Riot Inc. on DHS agents referred to it as the protest industrial complex, a term that captured the scale and sophistication of the operation. Riot Inc. wasn't just a loose coalition of activists. It was a coordinated system designed to sustain and amplify street violence. If Antifa was the boots on the ground, a DHS analyst explained, Riot Inc. made sure those boots stayed on the ground. The investigation revealed staggering financial flows. Over $100 million had moved through Riot Inc.'s network, funding dozens of radical groups. Major players like George Soros's Open Society Foundation, the Arabella Funding Network, the Tides Funding Network, and Neville Roy Singham's network were named as key contributors. These organizations, operating under the guise of philanthropy, funneled money through intermediaries to support groups orchestrating riots. The overlap was undeniable. Portland's community safety grants were feeding into the same accounts as these national activist networks. At the White House, President Trump didn't mince words. "We're going to be very threatening to them, far more threatening than they ever were to us," he declared, vowing to target not just the rioters, but their financial backers. "That includes the people who fund them, probably some of the people I know, some of the people I dine with. But if they do, they're in deep trouble." A federal response takes shape. With the money trail exposed, the federal government mobilized. Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Justice Department stepped in, signaling a shift from investigation to action. But what would it take to dismantle this network? The federal crackdown. DOJ and DHS take aim. On October 3, 2025, Assistant Attorney General Harriet Dillon announced a civil rights investigation into Portland's handling of the ICE facility riots. Her letter to Portland Police Chief Bob Day and City Attorney Robert Taylor demanded a trove of evidence: body camera footage, arrest logs, internal emails, and after-action reports. The order came straight from Washington, with Dillon's office examining whether Portland officers had engaged in viewpoint discrimination, targeting conservative journalists and counter-protesters while giving Antifa a pass. The Justice Department's case was bolstered by DHS reports documenting over 20 non-intervention events during the protests, where officers stood by as Antifa wreaked havoc. These reports were cross-referenced with financial audits of Portland's community safety grants, revealing a pattern of selective enforcement tied to ideological money. By October 5th, the Civil Rights Division, under Bondi's leadership, authorized a joint review with federal auditors, expanding the scope to include any case where Portland police detained counter-protesters while ignoring Antifa's crimes. Bondi's resolve was clear. "Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets," she told the press. "It's breaking down the organization brick by brick, just like we did with cartels. We're going to take the same approach with Antifa, destroy the entire organization from top to bottom." A city under scrutiny. As federal agents descended on Portland, the city's leadership scrambled to respond. But the evidence was mounting, and the truth was inescapable. What did this mean for Portland and for other cities caught in Antifa's grip? Portland's reckoning. A city divided. Portland's response was a mix of public cooperation and private panic. City Hall and the Portland Police Department issued statements supporting transparency and due process, but off-camera, officers revealed a different story. Several told local reporters they had been ordered to avoid confrontations with left-wing crowds for de-escalation purposes, even when federal property was under attack. These directives, they claimed, came from higher-ups sympathetic to Antifa's rhetoric. The federal investigation didn't stop at Portland's borders. The FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, absent from the city for 5 years, returned to compare notes from Portland, Philadelphia, and Dallas. Each city showed similar patterns: local officials turning a blind eye to Antifa's actions, small stipends paid to liaison officers, and recurring financial transfers through the same non-profit intermediaries. By mid-October, DHS concluded that Portland's selective enforcement wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate effort to protect a financial network that fueled ideological violence. The report's final line was a gut punch. When law enforcement becomes financially entangled with political violence, public safety ceases to be neutral. For Portland, the consequences were immediate. Non-profits linked to the grant suspended operations, city attorneys froze outstanding funds, and federal subpoenas demanded correspondence between grant administrators and protest organizers. The city was no longer just a battleground. It was the epicenter of a national reckoning. A warning to the nation. Portland's story was a wake-up call, but it was only the beginning. As the investigation widened, the nation braced for what would come next, a backlash that could reshape how we view law enforcement and activism. The bigger picture. A national threat. What began as a single arrest in Portland had exposed a network that stretched across the country. The protest industrial complex wasn't confined to one city. It was a coordinated system that thrived on ideological money and exploited the trust of communities. Cities like Seattle, Chicago, and Philadelphia showed similar patterns of selective policing and questionable funding. The implications were staggering. If law enforcement could be bought by a cause, no city was safe. For DHS and the Justice Department, the next step was containment. Federal agents were tasked with dismantling the financial pipelines that fueled Antifa's operations, from wire transfers to non-profit intermediaries. The FBI, DEA, ATF, and U.S. Marshal Service were brought in to share data on suspected extremist financing, signaling a full-scale federal effort to uproot the protest industrial complex. But the findings also sparked a broader conversation. How had this network operated undetected for so long? And what did it mean for the future of public safety? The DHS report warned that when ideology, money, and authority converge, neutrality erodes. For ordinary Americans, it was a chilling reminder that the badge meant to protect them could be swayed by the very forces it was meant to stop. What's next for America? As the investigation moves forward, the nation watches closely. New evidence, footage, and federal responses are on the horizon, promising to reveal even more about this shadowy alliance. But one thing is clear: the fight for truth and justice is far from over. Stay vigilant, stay informed. The Portland scandal is more than a local crisis. It's a warning to every American city. When law enforcement prioritizes ideology over duty, the consequences are deadly. The DHS and Justice Department are working to dismantle this corrupt network, but the battle is just beginning. New developments are emerging daily, from leaked documents to federal subpoenas, and the truth is coming into sharper focus. To stay ahead of this story, subscribe to channels like Outlawed, where independent journalists break down the corruption, political manipulation, and hidden agendas shaping our nation. Click on the recommended videos to dive deeper into this unfolding saga. The truth is out there, but it's up to us to keep seeking it.